I never believed in fate until that rainy September morning at Berkeley High. As I rushed through the crowded hallway of the science building, my worn-out Converse squeaking against the linoleum floor, I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. My name is Nathan Mitchell, and this is the story of how a simple class project turned into the greatest adventure of my life. Mrs. Harrison's advanced chemistry class was notorious for its demanding group projects, and as a junior who preferred working alone, I dreaded the moment she would announce our new assignment. The autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows as I slid into my usual seat in the back row, pulling out my dog-eared notebook. Today, Mrs. Harrison announced with her characteristic enthusiasm, we're starting our semester-long research project on sustainable energy alternatives. You'll be working in pairs. A collective groan rippled through the classroom. I sank lower in my chair, already mapping out strategies to convince Mrs. Harrison to let me work solo. That's when I heard a soft clearing of throat beside me. Hey, would you like to be partners? I looked up to find Emma Reynolds standing there, clutching her textbook to her chest. Emma Reynolds, the girl who transferred from San Francisco 3 months ago, who'd already become the lead in the school play, who somehow managed to ace every test while running the environmental club and volunteering at the local animal shelter. That Emma Reynolds. My brain short-circuited. Emma could have partnered with anyone in the class. She was brilliant, popular, and universally liked. Meanwhile, I was the quiet guy who spent lunches in the library coding personal projects and whose biggest claim to fame was winning last year's state robotics competition. We existed in completely different social orbits. Me. I managed to croak out. She smiled, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Yeah, you. I've seen your robotics projects. You built that solar-powered water filtration system last semester, right? I figured with your engineering skills and my background in environmental science, we could create something amazing. Before I could process what was happening, Mrs. Harrison was beaming at us and marking us down as partners. As Emma pulled up a chair beside me, I caught a whiff of lavender, her signature scent, I would later learn, and tried to ignore the curious stares from our classmates. What I didn't know then was that Emma hadn't chosen me randomly. Later, much later, she would confess that she'd been watching me for weeks, intrigued by the quiet boy who built beautiful things in the robotics lab. She'd notice how I stayed late after school to help freshmen with their science projects, even though I never mentioned it to anyone. She'd seen me sharing my lunch with homeless people on my way to school, thinking no one was watching. But at that moment, all I knew was that my carefully ordered world was about to be disrupted in the most unexpected way. Our first project meeting was scheduled for that afternoon in the school library. I arrived early, armed with my laptop and a stack of research papers on renewable energy. Emma breezed in 5 minutes late, her cheeks flushed from running and her green eyes sparkling with excitement. Sorry I'm late, she said, dropping into the chair across from me. I was helping Ms. Rodriguez set up for tomorrow's environmental club meeting. But wait until you hear this idea I had on my way here. She pulled out her notebook, covered in doodles and sticky notes, and started sketching out her vision. Emma wanted to create a miniature sustainable city model, combining solar and wind energy with a smart grid system that could optimize power distribution. It was ambitious, possibly too ambitious for a high school project, but her enthusiasm was infectious. As she talked, her hands moving animatedly, I found myself getting caught up in her excitement. I started adding technical details to her sketches, suggesting ways to implement the smart grid using Arduino controllers. Before we knew it, 3 hours had passed, and the librarian was giving us pointed looks about closing time. That evening, as I walked home through the drizzling rain, I couldn't stop thinking about our project. Or, if I'm being honest, about Emma. There was something about her that made everything seem possible, that made my carefully constructed walls start to crack. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The next morning, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. 2 seniors were talking in the hallway, and I caught Emma's name. Did you hear? Emma's only doing this project with Nathan because of the bet. What bet? Jason Thompson bet her she couldn't get the robot boy to fall for her by Christmas. Winner gets the lead in the spring musical. My world tilted on its axis. Of course. It all made sense now why someone like Emma Reynolds would suddenly take an interest in someone like me. I'd been so stupid to think otherwise. What I didn't know then was that this conversation would set off a chain of events that would test not just my heart, but everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and judging people based on appearances. Because Emma Reynolds had secrets of her own, and the truth was far more complicated than any high school rumor. As I stood there, my notebook clutched tightly to my chest, I made a decision. I would continue with the project I had to, for the sake of my grade. But I would guard my heart carefully. No matter how intoxicating Emma's laugh was, or how her eyes lit up when she talked about saving the planet, or how she made me feel like I could be more than just the quiet guy in the back of the room. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would reshape both our lives in ways we could never have imagined. Because sometimes, the most beautiful things grow from the most unexpected partnerships, and sometimes, the truth isn't what it seems at all. That afternoon, when Emma bounded into the library for our second project meeting, her arms full of research materials and her smile bright enough to light up the room, I felt my carefully constructed walls trembling. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this story than what I'd overheard in the hallway. The rain outside had finally stopped, and a weak autumn sun was breaking through the clouds. As Emma spread out her materials on the table, chattering excitedly about a breakthrough she'd had in environmental impact calculations, I found myself facing the first of many choices that would define our story. Should I confront her about what I'd heard, or should I wait and watch, protecting my heart while trying to uncover the truth? The answer to that question would change everything, but not in the way either of us expected. Because sometimes, the most important projects in life aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that plan us. Part 2, Walls and Bridges. October arrived with a burst of autumn colors and increasingly complicated feelings. Our sustainable city project was progressing remarkably well. Emma and I had fallen into an easy rhythm of after-school work sessions that often stretched into early evening. Despite my reservations about her motives, I couldn't deny that we made an exceptional team. The miniature city was taking shape in the robotics lab, where I'd gotten permission to set up our project. Emma's environmental concepts paired perfectly with my technical solutions, and even Mrs. Harrison seemed impressed by our progress reports. But while our project soared, my emotional walls were crumbling. It happened gradually. The way Emma would bring me coffee during our morning sessions, always remembering that I liked it black with just a hint of sugar, how she'd stick post-it notes with silly drawings in my textbooks, how she somehow remembered every random detail I mentioned about my life. One afternoon, she showed up with a spare umbrella because she'd heard the weather forecast and knew I always forgot mine. "Can't have my project partner catching a cold," she said with that smile that made my stomach do backflips. "We've got a city to build." But then there were moments that made me doubt everything. Like when Jason Thompson would walk by during our study sessions, exchanging meaningful glances with Emma. Or when I'd see her huddled in conversation with her theater friends, their voices dropping to whispers when I passed. The situation came to a head during the Halloween carnival. I hadn't planned on going. Large social gatherings weren't exactly my scene, but Emma had insisted. She was running the environmental club's booth, demonstrating eco-friendly alternatives to traditional Halloween decorations. "Please come," she'd said, her green eyes pleading. "I've got something special planned, and I want you to be there." So there I was, awkwardly navigating through crowds of costumed students, when I overheard another conversation, this time between Emma and Jason behind the environmental club booth. "You're taking this too far, Emma," Jason's voice was stern. "This wasn't part of the plan." "The plan was stupid from the beginning," Emma shot back, her voice trembling. "I never should have agreed to." She stopped abruptly, having noticed me standing there. The look on her face, a mixture of guilt and something else I couldn't quite read, confirmed my worst fears. I turned and walked away, ignoring her calls behind me. I spent the next week avoiding Emma outside of our mandatory project meetings. When we did work together, I kept things strictly professional, focusing solely on the technical aspects of our city model. If she noticed the change in my behavior, she didn't mention it. But I caught her watching me sometimes, with an expression that looked almost pained. Then came the accident in the robotics lab. I was working late one evening, fine-tuning the solar panel array for our model, when there was a short circuit. In my rush to fix it, I knocked over a beaker of conductive solution. The resulting electrical surge not only fried our Arduino controllers but also started a small fire. In my panic to extinguish it, I managed to get a nasty electrical burn on my arm. I was sitting in the nurse's office, getting my arm bandaged, when Emma burst in. Her hair was a mess, she was still in her theater rehearsal clothes, and she looked absolutely terrified. "I came as soon as I heard," she said breathlessly. "Are you okay? What happened? Why didn't you wait for me to help with the wiring? Why do you care?" I snapped, the pain and frustration of the past weeks finally boiling over. "Isn't this just a project to you? Just a bet you're trying to win?" Emma stepped back as if I'd slapped her. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face going through a range of emotions I couldn't quite follow. Then, to my complete surprise, she started laughing, a sad, hollow sound that made my chest ache. "A bet," she repeated, shaking her head. "Of course you heard about that. Everyone probably heard about that. But did anyone bother to hear the whole story?" She pulled up a chair and sat down, her eyes fixed on my bandaged arm. "You want to know the truth, Nathan?" "Yes, there was a bet. But not the one you think. Jason bet me that I wouldn't have the courage to finally talk to the boy I'd been watching since my first day at Berkeley High. The boy who built beautiful things and helped others when he thought no one was looking. The boy who made me nervous enough that I needed a stupid bet as an excuse to finally approach him." I sat there, stunned, as Emma continued, her voice getting quieter. "The lead in the spring musical. I already turned it down. I told Jason he could keep it. Because somewhere between all our late-night project sessions and your ridiculous coffee addiction and the way you scrunch your nose when you're coding, this stopped being about any bet. It became about..." She trailed off, standing up abruptly. "You know what? Never mind. You've clearly made up your mind about me, and maybe that's fair. I'll talk to Mrs. Harrison tomorrow about reassigning partners. I'm sure we can salvage enough of the project to..." "Emma, wait." I caught her wrist as she turned to leave, ignoring the protest from my injured arm. The touch sent an electric current through me that had nothing to do with my recent accident. I think maybe we both need to hear the whole story." She turned back slowly, and I saw tears in her eyes. But before either of us could say another word, Mrs. Harrison burst into the nurse's office, followed by the principal and the fire marshal. Our conversation would have to wait. What followed was a whirlwind of incident reports and safety reviews. Our project was temporarily suspended pending an investigation, and suddenly the simple story of a boy, a girl, and a class project had become impossibly complicated. But as I watched Emma fiercely defending our work to the administration, I realized something important: sometimes the most complex circuits are the ones that connect two hearts. And maybe, just maybe, those circuits were worth the risk of getting burned. Part 3, Rising from the Ashes. The week following the lab accident felt like walking through a dream or maybe a nightmare. Our sustainable city project, which had been our pride and joy for the past 2 months, sat cordoned off in the robotics lab, partially charred and completely off limits. The administration had launched a full investigation into lab safety protocols, and rumors were flying that they might cancel all student research projects for the remainder of the year. But somehow, among all this chaos, Emma and I found our way back to each other. It started the morning after the accident. I was sitting alone in the cafeteria, my burned arm throbbing beneath its bandages, when Emma appeared with 2 cups of coffee, one black with a hint of sugar, just how I liked it. "I think," she said, sliding into the seat across from me, "we need to finish our conversation." For the next hour, skipping our morning classes, the first time I'd ever done such a thing, we talked. Really talked. Emma told me everything about how she'd noticed me long before the chemistry project, about how she'd spend extra time in the library just to watch me work with the freshmen on their science projects, about how terrified she'd been to actually talk to me. The bet with Jason, she explained, absently stirring her untouched coffee, was his weird way of trying to help. "He's my step-brother, did you know that? Our parents got married last summer, right before I transferred here. He saw how much I talked about you at home, and he got tired of hearing me make excuses about why I couldn't just introduce myself." I sat there, feeling like the world's biggest idiot. But that day at the Halloween carnival, "He was telling me off for not being honest with you about my feelings," she said, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "He thought I was hiding behind the project instead of just telling you the truth." The truth. It seemed so simple now, sitting there in the morning light of the cafeteria, both of us scared and hopeful and finally honest with each other. But we had bigger problems to deal with, namely, saving our project and possibly the entire school's research program. That's when Emma's eyes lit up with that familiar spark that I'd come to associate with her best ideas. "Nathan," she said, leaning forward, "what if we could turn this whole thing around? What if we could use this accident to make our project even better?" And just like that, we were back in planning mode. We spent the next few days redesigning our entire project, incorporating new safety features and fail-safes that would not only prevent similar accidents but could be applied to any student research project. Emma's environmental knowledge combined with my technical skills in a way that felt almost magical, like we were finally operating at our full potential. We presented our new design to the administration, a smart city model with integrated safety protocols, emergency shut-off systems, and real-time monitoring capabilities. But more than that, we showed them how student research projects could be made safer without sacrificing innovation and creativity. Principal Anderson was impressed enough to not only reinstate our project but also to implement our safety protocols across all science departments. Suddenly, we weren't just the kids who'd almost burned down the robotics lab, we were the ones who'd made it safer for everyone. Working together on the revised project, Emma and I fell into a new rhythm. Gone were the awkward silences and hidden feelings. Instead, there was something deeper, something real. We stayed late after school rebuilding our city model, our hands brushing as we rewired circuits, our laughter echoing through the empty halls. One evening, as we were putting the finishing touches on the new solar array, Emma looked up at me with those incredible green eyes. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd be grateful for a lab accident." I knew exactly what she meant. Sometimes it takes everything falling apart to see what's really important. I was about to tell her this when Jason appeared in the doorway. "Hate to interrupt the lovebirds," he said with a knowing smirk, "but Emma, Dad just called. It's about Mom. They're at the hospital." The color drained from Emma's face. She looked at me, then at our half-finished project, torn between responsibilities. I was already packing up our tools. "Go," I said. "Family first. I'll clean up here." She hugged me quickly, our first real embrace, and rushed out with Jason. It wasn't until after they'd gone that I realized she'd left her project notebook behind. As I picked it up, a folded paper fell out, a college application essay. The title caught my eye, "The Day a Failed Project Taught Me About Success." I shouldn't have read it, but I did. And what I read changed everything I thought I knew about Emma Reynolds, about our project, and about the real challenges we were about to face. Because sometimes the biggest tests in life aren't the ones we study for, and sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught in any classroom. As I sat there in the empty lab, Emma's words on the page before me, I realized that our story was far from over. In fact, the hardest part was just beginning. #Part 4, The Weight of Dreams. I didn't sleep that night. Emma's college essay kept replaying in my mind, each word etched into my memory like circuit paths on a motherboard. The essay wasn't just about our project or the accident, it was about her mother's battle with aggressive lymphoma, about moving to Berkeley for better treatment options, about finding hope in unexpected places. And it was about me, though she never mentioned my name directly. In a city of strangers, she had written, I found someone who taught me that sometimes the most sustainable energy comes from the human heart. The next morning, Emma wasn't at school. Neither was Jason. My texts went unanswered, and the hollow feeling in my chest grew with each passing hour. Mrs. Harrison pulled me aside after chemistry class. Nathan, she said gently, Emma's mother had a severe reaction to her new treatment last night. They don't know. She paused, choosing her words carefully. They're not sure how long she has. The world tilted on its axis. Suddenly, all our project drama seemed impossibly small. I remembered Emma's dedication to environmental science, her passion for sustainable living, and it clicked. She wasn't just trying to save the planet, she was trying to create a better world for someone who might not have much time left in it. I found myself at the hospital after school, clutching Emma's project notebook and a bag of her favorite candy Sour Patch Kids. She always said they were like life, sour then sweet. Jason met me in the lobby, looking exhausted. She's been asking for you, he said, leading me through sterile white corridors. But there's something you need to know first. He stopped outside a consultation room. Emma got accepted to Stanford's early admission program. Full scholarship, starting next semester. They have a specialized environmental engineering program she's been dreaming about since freshman year. My heart swelled with pride, then immediately sank. Next semester. That was just weeks away. She was going to tell you, Jason continued, but then Mom got worse, and... He trailed off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. She's not going to take it. She's already drafted her rejection letter. She won't leave Mom, not now. I found Emma in her mother's room, curled up in a hospital chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Mrs. Reynolds was asleep, her face pale against the white pillows, machines beeping softly around her. When Emma saw me, she burst into tears. We ended up in the hospital garden, sitting on a cold metal bench under a cloudy December sky. Emma told me everything about the Stanford acceptance, about her mother's worsening condition, about her decision to give up her dream school to stay close to home. I can't leave her, she whispered, her head on my shoulder. But I can't bear to give up Stanford either. I've worked so hard for this, Nathan. Every project, every late-night study session, every volunteer hour, it was all leading to this program. They're doing groundbreaking research in sustainable energy solutions. The kind of work that could really change things, really help people like Mom. I held her tighter, my mind racing. Our sustainable city project sat half-finished in the robotics lab, waiting for its final touches before the winter break presentation. But suddenly, I had an idea, one that might be either brilliant or completely insane. What if, I said slowly, we could do both? What if we could find a way for you to be in two places at once? Emma lifted her head, confusion mixing with tears in her eyes. What do you mean? I pulled out my laptop, opening the designs for our smart city project. Remember how we integrated remote monitoring systems after the accident? What if we could expand on that? Create a whole remote presence system? For the next hour, we sat in that cold garden, planning and sketching. We could modify our existing project into a prototype for a remote patient monitoring system, one that would allow Emma to track her mother's vital signs, communicate with her doctors, and even have virtual presence in the hospital room from anywhere in the country. It would need to be more than just another telehealth system, Emma said, her engineering mind engaging despite her exhaustion. It would need to be personal, I finished. Human. Like having a piece of home with you wherever you are. As we worked, I saw something rekindle in Emma's eyes, that spark of possibility I'd first noticed months ago in chemistry class. But then she looked at me, and the spark dimmed. Even if we could build this, she said softly, even if it worked perfectly, I'd still be leaving. Not just Mom, but... She touched my cheek gently, everything else I found here. The unspoken words hung between us, she'd be leaving me. 3,000 miles and 3 years of high school suddenly felt like an unbridgeable gap. But looking at her there, brilliant and brave and broken-hearted, I knew what I had to do. What I didn't know was that my next words would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything we thought we knew about love, distance, and the true meaning of partnership. Because sometimes the biggest test of love isn't staying together, it's knowing when to let go. Part 5, the final project. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of coding, soldering, and endless cups of coffee. We practically lived in the robotics lab, transforming our sustainable city project into something entirely new. Our original environmental monitoring systems evolved into a comprehensive remote care platform we called Bridge, because that's what it was meant to be, a bridge across distance, across time, across circumstances. The winter break presentation was approaching fast, but we had a more pressing deadline. Stanford's spring semester would start in January. Emma still hadn't sent her acceptance or rejection letter, the deadline looming like a storm cloud on the horizon. Mrs. Harrison and the principal were amazingly supportive when we explained our modified project. They even helped us coordinate with the hospital to test our prototype. Jason, proving himself to be more than just the cocky theater kid I'd initially judged him to be, used his drama club connections to help us organize a full demonstration. The morning of our presentation arrived with a light dusting of snow, rare for Berkeley. The robotics lab was packed with not just our classmates and teachers, but also hospital administrators, local tech company representatives, and even a few Stanford professors who joined via video conference. Emma stood beside me at the front of the room, her hand finding mine as we began our presentation. We demonstrated how Bridge could monitor vital signs, manage medication schedules, and facilitate real-time communication. But the real magic happened when we showed its unique features, how it could transmit not just medical data, but pieces of home, recorded messages, photos, even simulated presence through smart home integration. Distance shouldn't mean disconnection, Emma said, her voice strong despite her exhaustion. Technology can do more than just monitor and measure, it can maintain the human connections that make life worth living. The room was silent when we finished, then erupted in applause. The hospital administrators were already talking about implementing a pilot program. The Stanford professors looked impressed, making notes and whispering among themselves. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching Emma's mother, who we'd helped transport to the presentation in her wheelchair. She was crying, but smiling, the kind of smile that carries hope. After the presentation, in the chaos of congratulations and questions, I pulled Emma aside into the quiet of the school courtyard. The snow was still falling, catching in her auburn hair like stars. "You have to go," I said quietly. "Nathan." "Listen to me, Emma Reynolds," I interrupted, taking both her hands in mine. "You're going to accept Stanford's offer. You're going to go to California and change the world with your brilliant mind and huge heart. And your mom." I swallowed hard. "Your mom is going to be okay, because we built Bridge for exactly this reason. She'll have the best monitoring system, the best care team, and you'll be there with her every day, even from across the country." "But what about us?" she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. I smiled, pulling out my laptop. "Remember that fellowship application you caught me working on last week? The one I wouldn't tell you about?" Her eyes widened as I showed her the acceptance email from Stanford's High School Research Fellowship Program. "It's just for the summer," I explained quickly. "But it's in the same lab where you'll be studying. And next year, when I graduate." I didn't get to finish because Emma was kissing me, right there in the snow, with all the warmth and passion that had characterized everything she did since the day she'd asked me to be her project partner. Later that evening, after a celebration dinner with both our families at the hospital cafeteria, not glamorous, but perfect in its own way. Emma and I sat with her mother, showing her how to use Bridge's interface. "You know," Mrs. Reynolds said, looking between us with knowing eyes, "when Emma first told me about the quiet boy from her chemistry class, I never imagined he'd end up being such an important part of all our lives." 6 months later, I stood in the San Francisco International Airport, watching Emma's plane land. She'd just finished her first semester at Stanford, where Bridge had evolved from a high school project into a full-scale research initiative. Her mother, responding well to a new treatment protocol, had become the system's biggest advocate, helping other patients and families navigate long-distance care. As for me, I'd spent the semester coding like crazy, earning extra credits through independent study so I could graduate early. Berkeley High's robotics lab had become the testing ground for Bridge's next generation of features, and I'd already been offered early admission to Stanford's engineering program for the following year. Emma burst through the arrival gates, running straight into my arms. She smelled like lavender and possibility, just as she had that first day in chemistry class. "Ready to start our next project?" she asked, her green eyes sparkling with that familiar mix of mischief and brilliance. I kissed her in response, not caring about the crowd of travelers around us. Because that's the thing about love, it's the ultimate sustainable energy source, powering all the other projects in our lives. That evening, as we sat on a beach watching the Pacific sunset, Emma's head on my shoulder and our laptops open to the latest Bridge code updates, I thought about how a single moment in a high school classroom had changed everything. How one person asking you to be their partner for a class project could end up making them your partner in every project life throws your way. Sometimes the most important chemical reactions aren't the ones we study in class. They're the ones that happen in our hearts, binding two people together across any distance, through any challenge, forever changing the equation of their lives. And as Emma pointed out a bug in my code while simultaneously reciting environmental impact statistics and planning our weekend visit to her mother, I knew that this beautiful, brilliant, complicated love was the most sustainable project of all. Because in the end, the best partnerships aren't just about building something together. They're about building each other up, about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself, about creating something that lasts long after the final presentation is over. That's the thing about love stories that start with class projects, they never really end. They just keep evolving, growing, and building, one shared dream at a time.